Thank you for joining us today. I'm Athena Sanchez here with the City of Phoenix, and we are here to provide you a city update regarding water and development. We've been seeing it a lot in the news lately, and today I'm joined with Christine Mackay, Director of Economic Development for the City of Phoenix, and Cynthia Campbell, who's the Water Resources Management Advisor for the City of Phoenix. Good afternoon, ladies. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good afternoon.
I would really like to start with just a very basic question for each one of you. Can you first, Christine, tell me what it is that you do for the City of Phoenix and economic development?
Our job as economic developers is to help new companies choose Phoenix in which to grow and invest their capital, help our existing companies grow and come up with new technologies and move forward, bring new development on the commercial side to Phoenix. It's the revitalization of downtown and the central city and educating our workforce. So we have a really broad focus that we do here in Phoenix. So when you think of economic development, think of jobs and development.
And how does that benefit the City of Phoenix resident, like the everyday resident? How does that benefit them?
You know, it's in a number of ways. It is from having a job, of course, that they can put a roof over their head and food in their family's mouth and send their kids to school. So first and most basic, that is what the benefit is. But also those companies, their capital investment invests in Phoenix, whether it's through property tax or whether it's through sales tax that they generate. And that allows the city to invest in police and streets and fire, parks, libraries, pools, you know, all of the things that do benefit our residents. And what we find is it's jobs and our residents is a really symbiotic relationship. Our residents can't exist without the jobs, and the companies can't exist without our residents.
Yes, absolutely. All right, Cynthia, let's talk a little bit about what a water resource manager does for the City of Phoenix and really what you're responsible for our customers.
My role with the City of Phoenix is to advise the city manager and the city council on all matters related to water policy, water strategy. I manage the city's water resource portfolio. So that's a little separate from the utility. The utility uses the water resource portfolio, but at one point in time, the city decided that the issue of water in the desert is such an existential issue for Phoenix that really they needed that kind of policy advice in the city manager's office, speaking directly to the decision makers as well as the city council.
Day to day, what does that look like in terms of day to day and then long term, like 10, 15, 20 years out, how you're preparing the city for what it will look like in 20 years from now in terms of water supply?
I am the fourth water resource management advisor that the city has had. And I have to say, I really stand on the shoulders of giants, people who really were thinking ahead. And even before we had a water resource management advisor, the city has taken water as one of the fundamental things that makes Phoenix work, right? We can't live here in the Sonoran Desert without water and without having water sustainably. So being able to plan ahead, being able to amass a portfolio that's always been bigger than we needed and has always been diverse in terms of resource location has been really important to the city. But some days it's a little harder than others, but most days it is a very gratifying job.
I imagine. And because we're talking about water and development, I'd like to talk to you, Chris, about some of these news stories that we've been seeing reporting that the water supply is either slowing or stopping development in the City of Phoenix. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about if there has been an impact to development in the City of Phoenix because of our water supply, or are those news stories reporting something a bit inaccurate?
Because of the work Cynthia just talked about, the giants that she stands on the shoulders of, and I would argue that she's one of those giants that has protected our water portfolio. The City of Phoenix is in this great position. So we work really closely with the water department as we bring in businesses into the community. And those businesses are very technologically advanced. They reclaim and recycle water. They work very thoughtfully through our water portfolio. And as we work together, we have found that water is not an issue for us in the least little bit as we look at it thoughtfully. We're very thoughtful in our planning as we are moving forward. But I think what's interesting is that we didn't really become a target of someone with water because nothing's really changed since I'm a kid. And I've been an economic developer for 30 years in this market, and I've always told the water story to companies that were looking at Phoenix. We grew up in a desert, we live in a desert, we work in a desert, and we're respectful of the fact that we live in this desert. And that's always been good enough for companies to date. And now what you find is because we've seen some tremendous economic development successes over the past few years, we've become a target. And so they're looking for ways to kind of shut Phoenix down and get us out of the market and out of the competition by saying that we don't have any water. And nothing could be farther from the truth. We've got a 100-year water supply.
Oh, that sounds like it's making your job very interesting, right, to say the least?
It is an interesting time to be able to kind of circumvent these stories and to be able to get facts as opposed to just this rhetoric out in the market. I think it's really interesting. We have drought is being declared all over the world, and in places you've never seen drought before, in the Midwest and in the Southeast and in the upper Northwest. And those cities are now calling Phoenix to find out how we've put together our drought strategy that we've lived by since the late 1800s. This hasn't changed. Our water portfolio has been the same for a long time. It was thoughtfully planned by really smart people who you almost would think they looked ahead and knew exactly what was going to happen.
Right.
I think they did a phenomenal job. And so when you look at those businesses, when you look at our water portfolio, when we can tell them the factual story, they get it very, very quickly, and they feel very comfortable about selecting Phoenix.
Right. It's like we didn't just wake up one day and decide we wanted to live in the desert. This is something we've known and we've been planning for a really long time. Speaking of planning for, over the next year or so, we're going to give up about 150,000 acre feet of entitlement on the Colorado River. Is that correct, Cynthia?
So we're giving up 50,000 acre feet a year. So in 2023, we'll give up 50,000 acre feet. 24 and 25. That's the plan. And I want to be really clear about this because I think there's been some miscommunication about that as well. When I say giving up, we haven't given up the right to anything. We still have a contract for Colorado River water in the full amount. What we have agreed to do is we've agreed to leave the water that we would otherwise order and put in the ground for future storage. We've agreed to leave it in Lake Mead near Las Vegas to elevate the levels of that reservoir and keep the sustainability and stable conditions on the Colorado River. And we're doing that in concert with a whole number of other users. So if we need to change our mind, we can change our mind. And when that time frame of the current agreement is over, we still have access, water rights, contracts to that same 50,000. We haven't given anything away.
Right. And how does that affect City of Phoenix customers or businesses?
So it doesn't really have any immediate effect on Phoenix customers or businesses. In fact, as I mentioned before, this is water that we would have otherwise stored locally in aquifers in central Arizona. So it's not water that was going to go through anyone's tap. It was not water that was going to be used by any business or manufacturing firm. There's plenty of water for both taps and the businesses that currently are in Phoenix and are coming to Phoenix.
Right. Okay, so I want to talk about how those effects of the Colorado River that you've been seeing in development, on the development side, are we seeing businesses worried, scared? Are they coming to you? What's going on once they hear information about the Colorado River?
What's interesting is, as I said, for 30 years, we've told the same story about water here in Phoenix. It really hasn't changed. But there was one moment in time over this past year that really caused the conversation about water to change, and that was the Rio Verde. So Rio Verde is a community that lives outside the city of Scottsdale. It was a community that when they signed the deeds for their homes, they understood that they didn't have a dedicated water source, and they built their homes there, and that's okay. Scottsdale provided them the water with the understanding that they would only provide them the water for a certain amount of time. When the news went out that Rio Verde was out of water, it went viral across the entire country. And all of a sudden, Rio Verde, because of the way the conversations happen, we're big sister Phoenix. And so everybody talks about Phoenix as in relation to Rio Verde or some of these other areas, and they think it's Phoenix that has the water problem. It was just this really odd change over one thing that happened that was absolutely blown out of proportion that had nothing to do with Phoenix. And we got pulled into that conversation. Following that, we got a significant number of calls from businesses and from investors who have real estate portfolios here in Phoenix who are looking at making real estate investments. And this is really where my hat's off to the water team. In an easy to understand piece for investors to understand, this wasn't the chief cheerleader telling you that we were good with water. This was facts from our water department telling you how thoughtfully our water had been planned for more than 100 years and what a good place we were in. And I am really happy to say that everyone we got in front of, we didn't lose a soul. We were able to rescue back every one of those businesses, set the record straight, but more importantly, those pieces that we got out to them, they're now using to set the record straight across the country in what are facts about water in Phoenix.
Right. And speaking of some headlines that we saw over the summer, the Arizona Department of Water Resources issued a report discussing groundwater, and that really took off, right? The information, whether it was reported accurately or not, was just all over. Can you share with us how that impacted the City of Phoenix water supply?
Sure. So over the summer, the Arizona Department of Water Resources issued a model, and it does groundwater models in the Phoenix metro area periodically, usually associated with most of the cities within the Phoenix metro area coming back to renew their designation of assured water supply that Chris has already mentioned. So the City of Phoenix has had a designation of assured water supply. That is a statement from the state of Arizona that we have proven to them that we have 100 years of water supply for both what's here and what's to come. But we have to go through a renewal every so often because we want to keep it real. It's not a stagnant, a day in time when there's 100 years and then you can rely upon that. It has to be updated approximately every 10 to 15 years. So all the Valley cities were ready for that. And as part of that process, the Department of Water Resources does a model. So they do a model of how much groundwater is available. They look at the current pumping rates and they extrapolate that over 100 years. And what they found was there are a few places within a large geographic area that's basically the same as Maricopa County, and actually a little bigger. And in a few of those places, there will be some limitations when you get to the latter part of that 100 years. Now, notably, not a single one of those locations was within the geographic boundaries of the City of Phoenix.
I see.
And so that's one thing. And then the second thing is that what the result of the model was because there was a slight deficit in the amount of water that's available over the 100-year period, the state, by statute, is required to stop issuing additional approvals to build solely on groundwater. And so these are approvals that are issued out in the edges of the metro area, in areas that don't have designations of assured water supply like Phoenix does. And so what ends up happening is that in those areas, their residential development has been curtailed for a period of time until we can figure out, or the cities that are involved can figure out how to get them different sources of water other than groundwater. But in Phoenix, it doesn't impact us at all. We have our designation, we're going to renew our designation, and we've already demonstrated that we have enough water for the next 100 years. So we're not looking for new additional groundwater allowances from the state. And so we're happy with what we have, and it's still there. It was in the model, and it was there for the whole 100 years, just as we suspected it would be.
Right, right. And so can you break down the water supply for the city of Phoenix, where we get our water from, and then how much of that water is actually coming from groundwater?
So Phoenix has primarily 4 sources of water. Sometimes you could say 5 if you split the Salt and Verde rivers. But the first is the Salt and Verde rivers. So they're different rivers, but they do come to a confluence just above Phoenix. So we generally count them as one. So all of the supplies that we receive through the Salt River Project come through the Salt and Verde, as well as several other supplies that are unique to Phoenix that we have water rights for that we use there. So that's about 60% of the water supply in the city of Phoenix. About 40%, just under 40% of the water supply used in the city of Phoenix comes from the Colorado River through the Central Arizona Project. That serves the northern parts of the city of Phoenix. And then what's left, and if you're doing the math, you're saying there shouldn't be any left, that's 100%, but it's about 2%, just under 2%, comes from groundwater. And that's water that's beneath our feet. And so we have a vast amount of water available to us underneath our feet, but we have made a conscious decision that that is our resource of last resort. And so we have chosen, since the 1980 Groundwater Management Act that the state of Arizona adopted, the city of Phoenix has chosen to use and rely upon renewable supplies from rivers as opposed to groundwater. So only 2% of our supplies come from groundwater. And really, in a lot of ways, the only reason we use groundwater at 2% is just to keep the wells that we have exercised. You have to keep using them, or they stop working.
Right. And we've been talking about the 100-year assured water supply. We know that that's a very rigorous program that the city goes through every year when they get their designation. But how does that 100-year assured water supply designation affect development and the work that you're doing?
So without the 100-year assured water supply, you would be challenged to be able to issue permits for the residential that's coming up, for all the others that are coming up, to be able to create the workforce that we need then for industry that comes into that particular area. So when we're working with companies, we are able to share with them Phoenix's assured water supply and in all of the different water sources that we have, which then helps them feel really comfortable about their locations and where they're coming to. What I think it's what Cynthia's team says, once you're on our service, your family, and you are going, that's their 100-year, our words for the 100-year water supply, your family, and you're gonna be served. That's not gonna change. I mean, it would take something drastic that would change across the globe before that could ever be affected.
Okay, and so let's talk about, because it's obvious, it's hot in Phoenix. We're in the middle of October and we're all still very hot. How are we incorporating water conservation into heat mitigation and the planning that we're doing for just a long-term sustainable future?
So what we're having to do is kind of balance that out, right? I think everyone pretty much knows that, if you use water, you can mitigate a lot of heat, right? We use water in cooling, and we use water to irrigate plants and trees and things like that. And that does help keep us cooler, and that's really important. And so using that water for that purpose is a good use. But also having water available for our residents to drink and bathe, cook and clean, as well as our commercial and industrial customers, is as important as well. So what we have to do is kind of balance out and make sure we're using water in the most sustainable way. When I say sustainable, let's be clear, it's not just a buzzword. It really means in a way that makes sure that the water resources that we have last forever, that we use them in a way that shows that we're wise stewards. And so I think the primary ways that we're really trying to focus on is in the context of water conservation. We're trying to really show people and educate people more on irrigation practices, how you water your outdoor environment, because a lot of our water use is used outside.
Right. And to let's talk about development, right? When I go outside of City Hall here downtown, we always joke about, like, let's count the cranes. Let's see how many cranes are outside. But in reality, has the number of cranes slowed down because of our water supply, or, as people may think, the lack thereof, if that's even accurate?
It hasn't. And so we, as you know, the crane is our favorite bird. It doesn't come any better in economic development. Every Friday we do a crane count across the city to see what cranes are out there. And it has not slowed down as development in Phoenix. The water situation, because of our partnership with our water department and being able to tell an accurate story, being able to get facts out to circumvent the misnomers that are out there, or the out and out mistruths that are being placed out there, has really kept our development moving forward. So we still are just growing in Phoenix like crazy. Our number of jobs we're bringing in is still in the top tier, and new development, new high rises, new industrial, new office, new retail is all still coming. And it's done very thoughtfully. Sometimes I'll be in community meetings and they haven't heard the facts. They've read the rhetoric or heard the rhetoric on the news, and they'll chastise me for the fact that we're bringing in this new business, or we're bringing in this new retail. And I can explain to them exactly what we're doing. And I always get from them, why is it that everybody doesn't know this? How are we not getting this story out? And we share with them that we are getting the story out, that you're getting your information from this one location. But Phoenix is this viable place for future growth because we've been so thoughtful since we were first founded 150 years ago.
And let's talk a little bit about the sustainable desert development policy that the water department really spearheaded over the summer, and tell me how that will affect the future of Phoenix.
We needed to make sure that new development comes in is sustainable, as sustainable and as efficient as we can possibly make it. That way we don't have to go back afterwards and say, oh, you need to increase your efficiency standards. We want to know that our new businesses, our new customers, our new family is part of our effort to really work at using water efficiently. So what the Sustainable Desert Policy does is it really, it asks new residents, it asks new businesses to really think with a mind toward using water efficiently, whether that is reducing the amount of landscaping that you have at certain parts of residential properties, or whether it's asking water users who might, as part of their business, use a lot of water, to really think seriously about recycling and conservation and best practices, and have a plan to do that. So that's really, in a nutshell, what that Sustainable Desert Policy is. But it's something that we would like to see all of our customers do, not just our new ones.
Right. And to the both of you, it really sounds like there's a lot of planning, a lot of very strategic thinking about how we're planning for our future, whether it's with water supply, whether it's development. So I think it's really important that we are sharing with the City of Phoenix residents and our businesses that their fear that comes from the news and the stories that they hear isn't always accurate. So really getting the information from the City of Phoenix directly is always going to be your best option, right? I think it's important that we are sharing the accurate information, the most up-to-date information. So I do appreciate both of you sharing your time with us today and this afternoon. Is there anything else that you would like to share with us before we wrap up?
I think one of the things I think our citizens should take comfort is knowing is those visionaries that created the water portfolio and the development portfolio here in Phoenix, that hasn't been set aside. That's still, to your point of what you said, that's exactly how we work today. We work together, we work thoughtfully. When we're looking at new companies coming in or new development, we look at what's the economic value of that gallon of water? What types of jobs are they bringing in? What economic multiplier goes into that? And as we look at our new residential development, we have a perfect example up on Sonoran Oasis Parkway that's a new residential development coming in the desert that is paying homage to the desert itself. It's not putting in landscape, it's not putting in green space, it's paying attention to our gorgeous open desert. And I think that's the way of the future. So I think our citizens can take comfort in the fact that there are a lot of people here with our city council and our city managers working diligently to ensure that those of us sitting on this couch 100 years from now are talking about the exact same story.
Yes, not just for our generation, but every generation that follows us.
Right.
Yes.
I think the other thing that I would add, and I think this is where a lot of the confusion comes from, is that when you start talking about water policy and planning, the horizon is so much further.
Right.
It's 100 years plus.
Right.
And so if I would say, and this is true, that really Phoenix is at a pivot point right now. We're having to make a pivot in the way we've managed our water resources. But the timeline for that, the horizon for that, is almost 100 years out. Chris's timeline is not a short one, but it's not necessarily, she's not looking for businesses to locate here in 90 years.
Yeah,
she's
right.
looking for them to come a lot sooner than that.
Yeah.
I'm looking for water resources and water management that is going to take us through year 90 without having to have a problem. It really relates to that difference in time horizon. So I might say in certain contexts, we have some challenges that we have to meet, but the challenges are not related to today's development.
Right.
It's not related to the time frame of businesses who will locate here in the next 10 years or 20 years.
Right.
It's related to making sure that those businesses that come will have water in 90 years
Right.
or 100 years.
Exactly. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. I'm Athena Sanchez with the City Update.